You heard that. Recording in progress. It is 1:45 and it is time to start. You know, I hope everyone had a nice quiet break. Me and my little friends had a very good time, and someone had asked why I haven't brought in animals lately. So I thought I would, and I'll start doing this again. This is a as yet unnamed Japanese.
What the fuck?
Oops, it has a dog. Saw my chicken. We have, and I have several of these in the yard, free range, who give me these, which are organic, healthy, and I don't have bugs. And this keeps my dog occupied, who herds them, and she says hi. Hello. You notice how I can move her body, but her head stays the same. I always found that weird. But anyway, I'll let them go. Be right back. Anyway, speaking of stuff in the class, I do hear you. We're all struggling a little bit online sometimes. And, you know, when I was in your position, teacher would come into class, do the presentation, you take the notes, you take the test. I know online, we're looking for a little bit more structure. You're used to that. So I'm going to start doing a little bit more structure, organization, reminders, just to help you stay on track, help you do a better job, and help me communicate with you, because I really want to do the best job I can. So I'll start doing in every class. I will start explaining what we're doing, and I will leave up the notes that we have. So right off the top, if you remember this week, we have an assignment due on actually tomorrow evening. Unexpected consequences from media. Plenty of people have already suggested topics or given me drafts. I'll do that through about 2 o'clock tomorrow, Friday afternoon. And as you do this, again, this comes up. Folks have asked, and I'll do it again, I showed you before, where the grading, how I grade these. You notice 3 ways to get an A. We don't do pluses and minuses at UTC. And Canvas doesn't let me do 110 out of 100. But some people really do a great job. You go above and beyond, do like professional grad school work. So for those of you who do that, I want to give you that recognition. So 100 is, above and beyond. 400 words, 3 outsources, at least 5, usually more paragraphs, all well written and presented, above and beyond. 95 is an A. Again, we don't do pluses and minuses. A good job is an A. Minimum 300 words, 1 good outside source, 5 good paragraphs, no major errors. A good essay is still an A. You want 100, a little bit more. And nothing's perfect. And so that's why I give you opportunities for some effort. An A, again, in your GPA, a 90 is the same as 100. Very good, but one factual error. This is a big one for this particular assignment, more than one topic. When you talk about social media, for example, unintended consequences of social media, you'll do addiction and cyberbullying. That's more than one topic. Do just one. social media, and cyberbullying. You can get 300 words on cyberbullying or sexting or body image stuff. So that's one topic. On this one, a lot of people go, oh, social media and or the cell phone and 800 things. That's not a 300-word essay, that's a book. Less than strong
Oh,
outside.
it just needs to be 300 words. Bet. I can do that.
Yeah,
5 paragraphs.
there you go.
Look now.
Five paragraphs. I'll go down
5
some of the things that happen that hurt the essays. You know, less than strong outside topic, just something from local news, you know, local TV station, not an authoritative source, something that's clearly opinionated. Again, those are the things that are 5 points. And 85, good enough, done the job, but more than one error, not a great outside source. This is a big one here that brings you to the B. Failure to use or cite the outside sources. You just say, oh, I'll look something up, put it at the end, and never use it. The whole point of an outside source is to use it. So those are the kind of things that bring an essay to a B level. You know, B minus, you have a clue. Several errors, poor writing, failure to use or cite outside sources. Again, more than one as listed above. C, this is what I'm seeing a lot of at the C level. One paragraph, just, you know, one paragraph, 150 words, no outside sources, doesn't fit the assignment. For example, in ancient media, if you did something that wasn't media, like a clock or a compass, that brings it down to a C. And 5 days per late. So, I mean, if you give me something, and this is one of those things in school, if you do all the assignments in most classes, you'll end up with a B. You have to almost work hard to get a C. You really almost have to be almost blowing it off. And, you know, I haven't, in the years I have been doing these assignments, I haven't done any. I've never done a D. So that's basically the grading. Addiction to, okay, internet and addiction, good job, says Quentin Cole. Anyway, so that's how I grade them. Common mistakes I wanted to list, to go through. Again, on this one, the big one is more than one topic is the thing I see more than anything. Vagueness, this brings it to a 90. You know, vagueness, kind of when it's like, you know, it's just.
You're asleep.
I'm asleep. Someone is. You know, vagueness is, again, something like when you talk about the internet, what on the internet? Games, social media, be more specific. Or if you're talking social media, there may be, you know, Snapchat is different than, Snapchat is different from Facebook, Instagram. They're all different. So maybe if you're going to do social media, think of, don't just say social media, Instagram and women's body images, because that's a big thing. So those are the kind of things, specific, narrow, focused. And that's what we talked about at the beginning of the, of the semester, with all that stuff about how to do history. Here's where the rubber hits the road and you actually do it. Anyway, in today's lesson, we talk about the telegraph. Page 195 to 210 in Kavaric. You know, so I am using the book. It's right there when we get to the test. We have the recordings, we'll have this stuff.
Damn, not my fucking computer, Don.
Someone's computer, I hate that. And again, so those are the things we do. Okay. Someone had a question here to post these docs. I will do this every day before. I intend to do this every day. Again, I'm listening to you. And I want to do a good job for you to know what we're focusing on. And frankly, for me to try to keep a little better organized. Anyway, and I'll do this before class and I'll leave it up. And I may fill in some notes. Anyway, the telegraph shortened time and distance. You went from 3 weeks of getting a message from Nashville to New York. Now it's in a second. Time and distance don't matter anymore. How does that affect society? Anybody? All of a sudden, things are different. Time, all of a sudden it doesn't take 3 weeks anymore to get a message from here to there. It just there in a second. Well, in my earlier class in person, someone said you get more of a sense of nationalism because, all of a sudden you could talk to your cousin in North Carolina or Vermont. So, you're all Americans because you're all talking the same talk, same sort of stuff. So all of a sudden, again, distance, all of a sudden, here we are in Chattanooga. All of a sudden, California isn't so far away. And California matters. During this time, for example, 1849, they found gold in California. And you have the gold rush and people moving to Cali because all of a sudden, it's not the end of the world. So time and distance gets shortened. You put less thought into, that's a real good one, Sarah. Excellent. Less thought, more, not just less thought, but because it's short, you get less nuance and context. You say, oh, I'm going to move to California. You're not going to say, well, you're not, the messages are short. It's like Twitter. You get 240 characters. Why California? What's out there? Have you heard about earthquakes? No, you don't get that. What about bears? What about crossing deserts? Oh, I'm just going to go to California. So, and you see that in modern social media because it's short. We don't like the government. Let's attack the Capitol. Maybe that's not such a good idea. Well, you don't like the government. Let's go. You get short media messages. So that's all of a sudden, so that's good. So those are the kind of things, distance, time, everything changes. I have, and we'll talk a little about Samuel Morse, because we have the Morse code. One thing to look at. Morse did not, and this is one of those, oh, really? People think Samuel Morse invented the telegraph? We'll talk about that in a second. He invented Morse code. It's not the hardware, it's the software. It's not the computer, it's the browser, it's the spreadsheet, it's the word processing. They call it a killer app. That's what Morse code is. He did not invent the telegraph. He certainly perfected it, but no, it's a software and it immediate effects. For example, Mexican War of 1846. There was a border dispute with Mexico, and all of a sudden, Mexico's not far away. So we send in the troops and we win New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, California, Colorado. All of that becomes part of this country because the telegraph makes it seem not so far away. We'll go back to the module. Now that's old stuff. 19th century, right up there. Okay, I have here, and I'll go through a really good thing. Yeah, Morse, and we'll talk about this. Another interesting thing. He was a photographer first and an artist. He made money like Ben Franklin. He was rich enough, money buys time and gets you involved in inventing, in politics. Anyway, so I'll spend a fair bit of time on this video, and then we'll go through and say, hey, by the way.
I was not expecting to learn about my heart health from my genetic reports, but now that I have this info, it feels like I can take even more control of my health.
Do you know what the future holds?
Fortunes are made and fortunes lost. It brings a revolution in business, war, news, espionage, even love.
All of that.
This mother of networks is called the highway of thought, but it's not the internet. It is the telegraph system, invented over 150 years ago in the reign of Queen Victoria.
Yeah, a lot of it works just like the internet. It's second only to the printing press in the important invention that blows people's minds.
Radically increase the speed of all human activity and transaction.
The world suddenly got a lot larger than most people were prepared for.
This turned out to be a pretty important development.
Before the telegraph, the speed of communication changed little from the time of Julius Caesar through to George Washington. At the dawn of industrialization, steam power, and mass production in the late 18th century, the quickest way to send a message was still by horse. This meant isolated communities and delayed business. The Industrial Revolution was straining at its natural limits. For centuries, the simplest signals could be sent by sound. But while sound travels fast, it doesn't travel far. The urgent question of the early industrial age was how to communicate quickly and effectively over distance. The French, under Napoleon, sent messages along chains of towers mounted with semaphore arms. Signals were observed by soldiers with telescopes and passed along the line. They called it the telegraph, the ancient Greek for faraway writer, but it was slow, unwieldy, and didn't work at all at night. The answer to the problem of instant communication came in a flash. In the 18th century, there was a frenzy of experimentation with electricity, a phenomenon known since the ancient Greeks, but still little understood.
So you remember Ben Franklin and the kite? Again, a media guy who made some money and got some time to get into politics. He discovered not electricity per se, but that the electricity would go down his kite string and raise the hair on his arms. He discovered or theorized conductivity rather than electricity.
And without practical use. One early electrical pioneer, the French monk Jean Mollet, believed the speed of electricity might be used to send signals rapidly over distance. The Abbé Nollet set up an experiment to test his theory.
The Abbé Nollet had a bigger machine which effectively did this and could produce an appreciable charge. He arranged, having authority, a line of 200 monks. Each monk joins the next monk by a length of 250 feet of iron wire. You had a mile's worth of monks. And he applied the outburst machine to the two end monks. They all jumped because they all got an electric shock. And he concluded from that electricity must travel instantaneously and was therefore the way in which a signaling system might be organized.
How to signal without electrocuting monks?
Yes, one would not
I
like to
haven't got any
electrocute
monks.
monks.
The answer came in 1820 when a Danish physicist experimenting with electricity saw a needle twitch. Hans Christian Ørsted demonstrated that when he pumped electrical current through a coil of wire, it deflected a magnetic compass needle. Ørsted had discovered the electromagnet. The electromagnet made modern telegraphy possible. Scientists now knew that if you sent electrical current down a wire, it could produce a magnetic field at the other end, some distance away, and move a needle. The race was on to perfect what came to be called the electric telegraph. In the 1830s, two Britons led the field, Charles Wheatstone and William Cooke.
Wheatstone was a very eminent scientist who'd done things like measure the speed of electricity and the speed of light and that sort of thing. And Cooke was someone who was looking for a get-rich-quick scheme. The two men didn't get on personally very well at all, but between them they had the combination of qualities that was needed to take the telegraph out into the world.
See, it wasn't Morse. It was Wheatstone and Cooke, 10 years before Morse, who started the whole thing. We don't remember them because, all right, we have an electromagnet, big woo. It's the app, it's the software that made the difference.
It was Cooke, the businessman, who realized how their electrical device could best be put to practical use.
In Britain, Cooke quickly identified that the best market for this new invention was with the railways. You could run a telegraph wire along the side of the track and you could use it for signaling.
And we call this phenomenon symbiosis. We see this on our phones, that you have different media working together. You have the phone and the photograph. We have the telegraph because you already have this structure of lines that you could, put the wires on, and the telegraph. All of this technology works together.
In 1839, The first commercial telegraph line in the world was run on overhead poles from Paddington Station to West Drayton along the new Great Western Railway. It was soon extended to Slough.
At one end of the system, you would have a battery and a switch. The telegraph wire would go along the railway line, and at the other end, it would be wound into a little coil, which became a magnet every time the battery was applied at the sending end. This would deflect a needle, and on the system that was adopted widely on the railways was a needle which moved to the left or to the right. And if you have two directions of movement, you can create a code. Left followed by right could be the letter A. Right followed by 3 pulses to the left, the letter B, and so on.
At first, the telegraph was used as a safety device to control the flow of trains. It quickly caught the imagination of the public, who were invited to visit the railway telegraph office at the cost of 1 shilling and witness firsthand the miracle of instant communication. Soon, Cook put the system to use, sending more general messages and not just train information. The first working telegraph from Paddington to Slough impressed the public in 1844 when it was used to announce the birth of Queen Victoria's second son, Alfred, at nearby Windsor.
The message was sent to London, and the Times was then able to report the news within an hour or so of the birth taking.
Again, all of a sudden, news media, again, media symbiosis. It telegraphs the news quicker.
Place. The telegraph proved its worth later after the birth because a huge celebratory banquet was held. 2 trainloads of eminent people, nobs and gentry, duly headed off for Windsor.
But the Duke of Wellington discovered that he had left his dinner jacket behind.
Oh, no.
On arrival, a telegraph message was sent to London to put his dinner jacket on the next train. He received it in time to be fully and appropriately dressed for the party. This, I suppose, impressed the trendsetters of the day.
The telegraph's reputation grew when it was used by the police to catch a notorious criminal fleeing by train.
John Towell was a murderer. He murdered his mistress in Slough and then made a run for it on the train. Normally, if you're a criminal and you jump on a train, you get away scot-free because there's no way of sending a message faster than a speeding train.
Police were after him, but by the time they reached the station, the train was just disappearing up the line. And of course, there was no way that the police could overtake the train. However, they had noticed the particular carriage that he got into.
Towell's description was telegraphed ahead of him down the line. He was described as being dressed like a Quaker. And in fact, the telegraph system that was used to do this was the Wheatstone and Cook system with needles, which only had a 20-letter alphabet, so there was no Q.
So when they signalled the word Quaker, they had to spell it K-W-A-K-E-R, which I think caused some confusion at the receiving end.
Anyhow, the description was duly received in Paddington, and when Towell disembarked, he was followed by police and was subsequently arrested. He was then put on trial for murder, was convicted, and was hanged. And the telegraph was then referred to in the newspapers as the cords that hung John Towell.
See, unintended consequences. You use the communication for law enforcement. All of a sudden, these innovations get all sorts of new uses. Again, the phone, we had George Floyd last year. All of that was recorded on a phone. We're getting so much more news and things aren't hidden because, again, unintended consequences of media.
The fame of Cook and Wheatstone's needle telegraph had spread overseas. But while their device was effective, its code was cumbersome. It was in the United States that one man invented a simpler system,
There you go.
together with a code that would conquer the world and change communications forever. Samuel Morse was a painter who had missed his wife's funeral because of a delayed message. He became obsessed with the idea of instant communication. In 1832, while on board a ship on his way back to America from Europe, Morse came up with the idea of a code which could be transmitted down a line with no more than an on-off electric switch. Morse code was born.
He concentrated on what we would today call the software rather than the hardware. And he came up with this idea that you would use a slightly fiddly code of long and short bursts of current, but that would enable you to have very, very simple hardware.
Morse's development was a code with just two elements, two conditions, a dot and a dash, or as telegraphists would say, a dit and a dar. The device is very simple. You press down on the knob, a contact makes, and current from a battery flows along the line, probably on wooden poles overhead with china insulators that kids love to smash with their catapults, until it reaches the telegraph building, flows through a little coil. The coil becomes a magnet, and it attracts a device which makes sound,
Click, click, click.
or it can be a device which moves something like a pen to make a mark on a piece of paper.
Then everything else was software in here. The interpretation, the decoding was not done mechanically, it was done in the mind of the operator, and operators could do this surprisingly quickly.
See, to code and decode, you needed a different skill set than, breaking rocks or plowing fields. This is also the beginning of the knowledge economy. It's based on your skills, your head, not the strength of your arms, legs, and back.
In Morse code, each letter of the alphabet is represented by long or short pulses of electricity. The more common the letter, the fewer the pulses.
I'm not a telegrapher, but here it goes. I sent dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, 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 which is SOS, something which everybody recognizes. The common letters like E were just a single dot, and another common letter like T was a single dash.
In 1844, Morse finally persuaded the United States Congress to fund an experimental telegraph line between Baltimore and Washington. On the 24th of May of that year, Morse sent the first official American telegraph message, a quotation from the Bible which captured his pious sense of wonder at electrical communication.
What hath God wrought?
A year later, Morse founded the Magnetic Telegraph Company and opened a line along the New York to Philadelphia Railroad. Now there was no stopping the new technology. The benefits of instant communication over long distance were obvious and immediate. From 1846 to 1852, there was a huge growth in the network as a web of telegraph lines spread across the American continent.
What we see is at the beginning of 1846, the only telegraph line in the whole of the United States is the one between Washington and Baltimore, for example. So that's 40 miles long.
But all of a sudden,
2 years later, 1848, there are 2,000 miles of wire in America. And 2 years later, again, there are 12,000 miles.
look at that. You can send a signal from San Francisco to New York in a second. All of a sudden, this isn't that far away. Again, we talk about the Mexican War, 1846 to 1848. Here's the border. The battles were mostly down here, but we won. This was all Mexico. This was all Mexico. We won all of that because, surprise, surprise, it's not that far away anymore. it matters. And I mentioned the California gold rush. Boop, boop, down, around and out. You learn about the gold rush immediately. All of a sudden, California is not so far away.
Of cable. We're looking at what today we would call exponential growth.
With Morse's simple hardware and a universal code flashing messages from city to city, entrepreneurs in other countries rushed to take advantage of the new age of telecommunications and set up their own networks.
There were several competing telegraph companies. Some of them only operated local networks. Some of them had national networks. Some of them had agreements with each other. Some of them didn't. There were all sorts of different price structures. The whole thing was a complete mess. Rather like it is today with, say, mobile phones. There are all sorts of different tariffs, and it was impossible to understand what was going on. In the case of the telegraph, of course, it was much messier because all of these different companies had to put their own wires up. And this meant that the roofs of the houses in London were just festooned with poles and wires, and they were all over the place. There were punch cartoons at the time showing women hanging their washing on these wires on the rooftops, and the city was being disfigured by this.
It was a real sort of fight to the death, and sometimes people would find their telegraph instruments weren't working because another telegraph company had come along and snipped their wires.
In this feverish atmosphere of new business, a new profession emerged: the telegraphers. Working in offices run like factories, handling hundreds of thousands of messages called.
Yep. Again, new technologies bring new jobs. Again, the telegrapher. You don't have to be breaking rocks or working in a field. You could use your mind to make a living.
Called telegrams every day.
You'd probably have between 50 and 100 clerks there, each of whom could be sending at an average rate of 25 words a minute. The only noise would in fact be the click of the Morse code instrument, because talking was not allowed.
The telegraph office had hundreds of instruments sending and receiving, clattering away the whole time. And then it would also have had the operators tearing around. Of course, the whole point about sending a telegram was that you wanted the message to get there as quickly as possible. So you couldn't sort of take your time in a telegraph office. Everything had to be done yesterday.
Once decoded at the telegraph office, telegrams would be delivered by messenger boys, who for years were a familiar sight on the streets like pizza dispatch riders today. But for many, the idea of instant electric communication was mind-boggling.
I think if you ask the average person today to explain how the internet worked, they think, oh yes, there's wires and there's electricity and pulses, but they'd be very hard pressed to explain exactly how it worked. No, it was the same in the 19th century.
One of the things that people found hard to understand about the telegraph was it broke the link between physical objects and information. They thought that the telegraph was actually sending matter. One woman in the 1870s is said to have tried to send a dish of sauerkraut to her son via telegraph.
The telegraph was this wondrous thing, but nobody knew anything about how it really worked. There was great unease about the long-term physical impact of all this electrical communication. There were fears that perhaps the earth would absorb the electricity from the wires and that towns would blow up as a result.
How about that? Misinformation comes with mass communication. Some things never change.
Despite these fears, by the mid-19th century, wired networks had been set up within Britain and the United States, and no towns had yet blown up. But the full potential of the telegraph had yet to be realized. If it was to extend its girdle round the earth, to connect Europe and America, it had to span 2,500 miles across the great natural barrier of the Atlantic Ocean.
In many ways, it was the moon project of the mid-19th century. It was so enormous an enterprise compared to anything that had gone before.
The man who took on the challenge was the American millionaire Cyrus Field. He backed the Atlantic scheme with $500,000. 2 warships, one American, one British, each with over 1,200 miles of cable aboard, met in mid-Atlantic, spliced the cable together, and sailed in opposite directions. After 3 attempts at this, Fields seemed to have worked the miracle.
Queen Victoria sent a message to President Buchanan, and President Buchanan sent a message to Queen Victoria. And there was a huge parade in New York, and fireworks from the roof of the City Hall that were so enthusiastic that they set City Hall on fire. And then they tendered a huge dinner in honor of Cyrus Field. And in the middle of the dinner, the cable stopped working after only having worked for 2 or 3 weeks. And it hadn't really worked at all. I mean, most of the messages were, could you please repeat that last message?
Electrical science was still in its infancy. The cable engineers hadn't realized that by pumping a high voltage
they
into
had
the
to
wire to strengthen.
Try it again. They got better cables.
The Great Eastern, launched in
And a
1858,
big bulky ship.
designed by the great British engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel.
So they figured it out.
Once it was proven to work, the Atlantic cable became profitable, taking in $1,000, a huge sum at that time, on its first day of business. The cable engineers had learnt from their mistakes. Low voltage current flowed through the cable and messages were received using the highly sensitive mirror galvanometer. Now, nation could speak unto nation. Messages from Europe to America, which had taken 3 weeks or more, had become instantaneous. It was the most extraordinary and fundamental change. It gave birth 150 years ago to the global economy and the wired world.
Okay, all of a sudden you got instant communication between New York and London, and then Paris and Berlin, and Philadelphia and DC. And it's all business. You're buying and trading and selling stocks. What difference do you think that made? Again, unintended consequences. Well, you have these linked economies. All of a sudden, these folks aren't your enemies anymore. The British were negotiating with the Confederacy during the Civil War to try to help the Confederates. But once their businesses were linked, all of a sudden the British became our friends because we had money in common. They did not, it's only been 40 years since the War of 1812. So the British become our friends again. Also, a real interesting thing, you have a 6-hour time difference. If it's 9 a.m. In London, when the banks open, it's 3 a.m. in the US. It's the middle of the night. So to start your business day, folks invented the night shift. One of the unintended consequences of the telegraph was working nights. Before that, no reason to stay up at night. You go to sleep. Now you get business coming in at all hours. So people started working nights. And after that, you had Edison promoting the light bulb to keep you up at night. Sleep deprivation becomes an unintended consequence of the telegraph.
The world of international commerce, 24-hour business and stock
24-hour
markets.
business, there you go.
Its foundations rest on the telegraph system created in the 19th century. When the Atlantic cable was successfully laid in 1866, the 2 great economies of the Victorian world, Britain and America, were linked more closely than ever. It was business that benefited. In 1871 alone, 42,000 telegrams were sent between Wall Street and the London Stock Exchange. as dealers traded bonds, stocks, and shares in each other's markets.
The telegraph is pure information. It's a plus and a minus, a dot and a dash.
Binary. It's truly digital. You know, everything we do on the computer, it's either a 1 or a 0. Binary. So is the telegraph. It's either a dot or a dash. It's the beginning of the digital revolution.
It digitalizes everything it touches,
Mhm.
including the language which it's transmitting, which it converts into this code. It does the same thing with commodities. It converts them all into prices. It allows the prices to be transmitted in space and for trading to occur in new ways.
In this newly global economy, the changing price of the pound and dollar against gold could be signaled across borders instantly. The currency market boomed. But with rapid transfers of price information of all kinds, the telegraph also boosted more traditional forms of trade.
If you were in the business of trading things, the arrival of the telegraph was very significant because it meant that how much you were prepared to pay for something or how much you were charging for something really became more important than where it was. And this shook up the world of business from the top to the bottom, because even fishermen coming into port with their catch could telegraph various markets to notify them of what they had, but also to find out what the going price was in various places. And then they could decide how and where they were going to sell it.
Formerly, people buying and selling did so in New York and Philadelphia, or in Boston and Manchester or London or Birmingham. These were separate places. The prices at which things were sold were quite different from place to place. Now, all of a sudden, these markets are one market because the telegraph connects them into one. You're living within the same system, the system you live within.
So yeah, the salesperson is always looking for the best price. They could find where the best price is, so all the prices are the same. If you ever filled up your gas tank lately, it's because OPEC over in Saudi Arabia wants to raise the price, so they're pumping less oil. Less oil, prices go up. Again, something on the other side of the world affects our gas tank. So here we go. We're all connected, and it all started with the telegraph.
Is the telegraph system that coordinates prices, quantities sold, quantities bought.
Before the telegraph, prices for identical goods could differ greatly from place to place. Merchants could make money by moving goods around, buying cheap in one city, selling dear in the next.
Now, if the price is the same in both places, what do? I start trading futures. I trade in time rather than space. I'll say, I'm going to bet that the price now is lower or higher than the price will be a month from now, 2 months from now. So then futures markets develop, in which we're essentially now trading time rather than space, the movement, if you will, of commodities in time rather than
the futures
space.
market, another unintended consequence.
The arrival of new markets and trading around the clock put pressure on those who...
And there's Reuters, world currencies, we all know what it is, but Reuters is an international news item. All of a sudden, you can get news in New York or Chattanooga from London or Paris. So your news gets more international, national, spread out, more connections throughout the world.
Worked in business. In 1868, the businessman W.E. Dodge complained that the telegraph made commerce a 24-hour job.
Yep, said starts the night
The
shift.
merchant goes home after a hard day at work to a late dinner, trying amid the family circle to forget business when he is interrupted by a telegram.
and must dispatch his dinner as hurriedly as possible.
An expression today that is widely used in computer circles. 24 times 7 times 365.
Yep.
Which means that activity goes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Don't tell me it's Christmas. Don't tell me it's...
That's right, because it's not Christmas in Beijing where they don't do Christmas. And it's the other side of the world where it's night here, it's day in Sydney, Australia. So no, 24/7.
Winter. Don't tell me it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Don't tell me anything except there is one uniform time as well as one uniform space. It universalized time. That sense of time, which is now rooted in our bodies, in our beings, in some sense, in our very metabolism as human beings. That sense of it is the telegraph's achievement, creating a canopy under which we all live and which has become our second nature.
It's even changed time itself. So it's a big deal. I'll finish that one here. Again, today is, and here's some more about Morse if you want to see that. So that is what we're doing. So there's lots of unintended consequences for the telegraph. That's why I use it for this particular assignment. Now, you could apply it to modern elements, but I say if you know, you can, you know, use modern things like cell phone, but again, we use the internet pretty broad because you can do it on a computer or a phone and they're all different. What do you get on the internet? Games, social media. So get specific and have some fun with it. You see what we're looking for. I look forward to it. I'll be taking drafts and ideas through tomorrow afternoon. And questions, answers, comments. I'll bring some other animal in next time. I don't know what I can catch in a short time. I'll come up with something. Anyway, I will, if there's anything else, I will see you next Tuesday, and I'll start again putting up notes and ideas as we continue. Anything else? Hey, thank you. Have a lovely, lovely day. Have a lovely weekend. And we start really a full week next week. Enjoy, rest. See you then. Stop share. Boom.